My name is Grace Thompson, and I'm 57 years old. Standing in this family court today, holding adoption papers for my deaf granddaughter Emma, I never imagined my own family would become my greatest enemy. 3 months ago, my daughter-in-law abandoned her newborn baby simply because she was born deaf. While everyone called me crazy for fighting the system, I spent years learning sign language in secret. What I discovered about my own family's cruelty would change everything forever. Before we dive into this heartbreaking journey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family stories. You won't believe what happened next when I first tried to see my granddaughter. The memory still haunts me every single day. 3 months earlier, I had driven to St. Mary's Hospital with balloons and a teddy bear, expecting to meet my first grandchild. My son Michael had called the night before, his voice strangely flat when he said, "Mom, the baby came early. Brittany's tired." Something felt wrong, but I pushed the feeling aside. After all, this was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. When I arrived at the maternity ward, Michael was pacing outside room 214, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't meet my eyes when I hugged him. "Where's Brittany? Where's my granddaughter?" I asked, my heart racing with excitement. His response shattered my world into pieces. "Mom, we need to talk. The baby, there are complications." He led me to a small waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. "What kind of complications?" I demanded, gripping his arm. "Is she sick? Does she need surgery?" Michael's hands shook as he ran them through his hair, the same nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "She's deaf, Mom. Completely deaf. The doctors confirmed it yesterday." I felt relief flood through me. "Thank God, is that all?" "Michael, being deaf isn't a death sentence. There are so many resources now, sign language classes, special schools." But Michael's expression stopped me cold. "Brittany can't handle it. She says we're not equipped to raise a disabled child. We've already contacted an agency." The room seemed to spin around me as his words sank in. "An agency? What kind of agency?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Foster care, Mom. We signed the papers this morning. The baby goes to a temporary home tomorrow." I shot to my feet, knocking over the plastic chair. "Tomorrow? Michael, she's only 3 days old. You can't just give up your daughter because she's deaf." His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "It's not giving up, it's being realistic. Brittany researched everything. Special needs kids require constant care, expensive equipment, specialized schools. We're not qualified for that kind of responsibility." "Not qualified?" I screamed, not caring who heard me. "You're her parents. Love qualifies you. I'll help with everything, the cost, the learning, whatever it takes." Michael stood up, his jaw set with stubborn determination. "Mom, you don't understand. Brittany's already decided. She won't even look at the baby. She keeps saying we need to cut our losses and try again for a normal child." The cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. Normal? She's a perfect baby who just happens to be deaf. "Where is she now?" Michael's eyes darted away. "In the nursery. Brittany refused to hold her or try feeding. The nurses are taking care of everything until the transfer." I pushed past him, heading for the nursery window. Through the glass, I saw her tiny form in a standard hospital crib, no family decorations or personal items around her. She was beautiful beyond words, with a shock of dark hair and perfect little features. A nurse was gently feeding her a bottle, and my heart broke seeing this stranger providing the love her own mother had rejected. I pressed my palm against the glass, tears streaming down my face. "What's her name?" I whispered. "Brittany won't choose one," Michael said behind me. "The papers just say baby girl Thompson." That's when Brittany appeared, walking down the hallway in street clothes, a discharge bag in her hand. She looked right through me as if I didn't exist. Michael, are you ready? The car's waiting. Her voice was cold, emotionless. I spun around to face her. Brittany, please, let's talk about this. I can help raise her. You don't have to do this alone. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with disgust. Grace, you need to accept reality. That thing in there will never be normal. She'll never hear music, never have a normal conversation, never fit in anywhere. I refuse to sacrifice my entire life for a defective child. The word defective hung in the air like poison. How dare you call her defective? She's your daughter. Not anymore, Brittany said, adjusting her purse strap. The papers are signed, and frankly, it's none of your business anymore. Michael and I are moving forward with our lives. Michael stood frozen between us, clearly torn but ultimately choosing silence. That silence felt like a knife in my back. Michael, you're really going to let her do this? You're going to abandon your own child? He finally spoke, but his words destroyed whatever was left of my heart. Mom, Brittany's right. We're young, we have our whole future ahead of us. We can have other children, healthy children. This is the best decision for everyone involved. I stared at my son, seeing a stranger where my loving boy used to be. The best decision for everyone except that innocent baby who needs her family. As they walked away together, Brittany turned back one last time. Oh, and Grace? Don't get any ideas about interfering. The adoption agency has strict policies about family contact. You'll never see her again. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. I stood there in that hospital hallway, watching my son and his wife drive away from their daughter, and I made a vow that would consume the next 3 months of my life. I would fight for that little girl no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I called every family lawyer in our county until I found Jennifer Walsh, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in grandparents' rights cases. Her office smelled of leather and coffee, and the walls were covered with photos of children she'd helped reunite with loving families. Mrs. Thompson, she said, reviewing the papers I'd brought, this is going to be an uphill battle. The parents' rights are very strong, especially when they voluntarily placed the child. But they abandoned her because she's deaf, I protested. Surely that's discrimination? Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. It could be, but we'll need to prove that their decision was based solely on the disability and not other factors they might claim. The problem is, they can argue financial inability or lack of proper resources. She leaned forward, her expression serious. I have to warn you, cases like this can get very ugly, very quickly. She was right. Within 48 hours of Jennifer filing our initial petition for visitation rights, Brittany had convinced a judge to issue a temporary restraining order against me. The papers arrived by courier on a Friday evening, claiming I had threatened to take the child by force and exhibited unstable and obsessive behavior that poses a danger to the minor child and her placement. I read the accusations with growing horror. According to Brittany's sworn statement, I had made numerous threatening phone calls, attempted to break into the hospital nursery, and screamed profanities at hospital staff when denied access. Every single word was a lie, but her signature on the legal document made them official. The restraining order prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Emma or any facility where she was being housed. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I arrived early, wearing my best navy dress and the pearl necklace my mother had given me, hoping to project the image of a stable, loving grandmother. Jennifer had coached me extensively on what to say and how to behave, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Michael took the witness stand and systematically destroyed his own mother's character. Under oath, he testified that I had become increasingly erratic and obsessed since learning about the baby's condition. He claimed I had called him dozens of times daily, showing up at his workplace and harassing his coworkers with demands to see the baby. According to my own son, I had threatened legal action against anyone who stood in my way and had refused to accept professional medical advice about the child's limitations. Each lie felt like a physical blow, but the worst was yet to come. When asked about my mental state, Michael hesitated for just a moment before saying, "Your Honor, I'm genuinely concerned about my mother's ability to care for herself, let alone a special needs child. She's been acting completely irrationally, and I fear what she might do if given access to my daughter." Brittany's performance was even more devastating. She took the stand wearing a simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a conservative style, tears already streaming down her face before she even spoke. Her voice trembled as she described her heartbreaking decision to place Emma in a loving foster home. "Your Honor, my husband and I agonized over this choice. We consulted with specialists, researched resources, and ultimately realized we couldn't provide the level of care a deaf child requires." When Jennifer cross-examined her about the speed of the decision, Brittany's tears increased. "We didn't want to bond with her and then have to give her up later when we couldn't cope. It seemed crueler to wait." She painted herself as a selfless mother making an impossible sacrifice while positioning me as a delusional old woman threatening the child's best interests. The judge, a stern man in his 60s, seemed completely convinced by their testimony. When he announced his decision, his voice was cold and final. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mrs. Thompson's behavior demonstrates an unhealthy obsession that could be detrimental to the minor child's welfare. The restraining order will remain in effect indefinitely, and Mrs. Thompson is prohibited from any contact with the child or attempts to interfere with her placement." I stumbled out of that courtroom feeling like my entire world had collapsed. Jennifer tried to reassure me that we could appeal, but the damage was done. I had been legally branded as a threat to my own granddaughter, and my son had been the weapon used against me. That evening, I sat in my empty house, staring at the baby clothes I'd been secretly buying, and wondered if I'd ever hold Emma in my arms. The only bright spot came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harrison, Emma's pediatrician, called me that Sunday evening. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the concern underneath. "Mrs. Thompson, I can't discuss specifics due to patient confidentiality, but I wanted you to know that some of us who've been involved in Emma's care have questions about the decisions that were made. If you're serious about fighting for her, there might be people willing to help when the time is right." That phone call gave me the first hope I'd felt since this nightmare began. While my own family had turned against me, at least one medical professional had seen through Brittany's lies and recognized that something was very wrong with this situation. I began researching everything I could about deaf culture, sign language, and children's rights, preparing for a battle that I was just beginning to understand. Dr. Harrison's cryptic phone call led me to the Central Valley Deaf Community Center, a modest building tucked away in an older part of town. I'd never paid attention to it before, but now it felt like a lifeline. The director, Elena Rodriguez, was a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and hands that moved gracefully as she spoke and signed simultaneously. When I explained my situation, her expression shifted from professional interest to genuine outrage. "This happens more often than people realize," Elena said, her voice filled with sadness. "Hearing parents panic when they discover their child is deaf, and they make decisions based on fear and misinformation rather than education and support." She led me to a small office filled with photos of deaf children and adults living full, vibrant lives. "The tragedy is that with proper support, deaf children thrive just as well as hearing children. Sometimes better, because they're part of such a strong, connected community." Elena introduced me to other grandparents who'd fought similar battles, and their stories both encouraged and terrified me. Mrs. Patterson had spent 2 years in court before winning custody of her deaf grandson, only after his parents had abandoned him to 3 different foster homes. Mr. Kim had mortgaged his house to pay legal fees, fighting for visitation rights that were ultimately granted just before his granddaughter turned 18. "The system is stacked against us," Elena explained as she handed me information about free sign language classes. "Courts assume that hearing parents know what's best, even when they clearly don't. But knowledge is power, Grace. The more you learn about deaf culture and sign language, the stronger your case becomes." She enrolled me in evening classes 3 times a week, and I threw myself into learning with desperate intensity. Meanwhile, Brittany was escalating her campaign against me. She'd apparently spent weeks calling my former colleagues, neighbors, and even my grocery store clerk, spreading the story that I was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. According to her version of events, I'd become dangerously obsessed with a baby that wasn't even genetically related to me, since she claimed Michael wasn't the father after all. The rumors spread like wildfire through our small community. My neighbor Carol, who'd been my friend for 15 years, started avoiding eye contact when she saw me in the yard. The substitute teaching agency where I'd worked for the past decade suddenly stopped calling me for assignments. Even my own brother Thomas called to express his concern about my mental state, suggesting I might benefit from professional help to work through my grief over losing a grandchild. Each conversation felt like a small betrayal, but the worst part was realizing how effectively Brittany had isolated me. She'd painted herself as a tragic young mother forced to make an impossible decision while dealing with a mentally unstable mother-in-law who couldn't accept reality. Michael had apparently told everyone that I'd completely lost touch with reality and was making threats against the baby's welfare. Through Elena's network, I learned that Emma had been placed with the Morrison family, a well-meaning hearing couple in their 30s who had no experience with deaf children. The Morrisons had been told by the agency that Emma's birth family had specifically requested a hearing family, believing it would give her the best chance at overcoming her disability. The ignorance in that statement made my blood boil. Elena's connections in the deaf community began quietly monitoring Emma's progress, and the reports were heartbreaking. At 4 months old, Emma should have been reaching important developmental milestones, but the Morrison family was treating her exactly like a hearing child, with no modifications or special considerations. They spoke to her constantly but provided no visual stimulation or early sign language exposure, essentially leaving her in a communication vacuum. "She's falling behind," Elena told me during one of our weekly meetings. Deaf babies need visual language input from birth, just like hearing babies need auditory input. The longer she goes without proper communication access, the harder it becomes to catch up later. The urgency in her voice matched the panic growing in my chest. Every day that passed was another day of Emma's development being compromised by ignorance. My legal situation grew more complicated when Jennifer discovered that Brittany had been secretly recording our phone conversations and had edited them to make my perfectly reasonable requests sound threatening and unhinged. Somehow, my tearful plea to please just let me see her once had been manipulated to sound like I'll see her no matter what it takes. These recordings were being prepared as evidence for a permanent restraining order that would legally prevent me from ever contacting Emma. The final blow came when Michael himself filed elder abuse charges against me, claiming I had been harassing and stalking him and his wife. The police report described me as increasingly unstable and potentially dangerous, citing my refusal to accept the family's decision and my obsessive behavior regarding a child who was no longer part of the family. The irony was devastating. I was being painted as abusive for trying to protect a child from actual abuse and neglect. As winter approached, I found myself completely alone except for Elena and the deaf community members who'd become my only allies. My own family had not only abandoned Emma but had turned against me with a viciousness that took my breath away. But in the quiet of my house each evening, I practiced signing until my fingers ached, memorizing vocabulary and grammar with the determination of someone fighting for a life, because that's exactly what I was doing. Dr. Harrison's second call came on a cold February morning, and his voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on high alert. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to see you in person, but not at my office. Can you meet me at Riverside Park in an hour?" The secrecy felt both thrilling and terrifying, but I knew this was about Emma, so I didn't hesitate to agree. He was waiting by the duck pond, looking nervous and checking his surroundings like someone afraid of being watched. When he saw me approaching, he gestured toward a secluded bench away from the walking path. "What I'm about to tell you could cost me my medical license," he began, "but my conscience won't let me stay silent any longer. Emma is not thriving in her current placement." The medical details he shared made me physically ill. Emma, now 7 months old, was showing signs of significant developmental delays that had nothing to do with her deafness. She wasn't reaching for objects, wasn't making normal eye contact, and had become increasingly withdrawn and unresponsive. The Morrison family means well, Dr. Harrison explained, but they're treating her hearing loss like a tragic flaw that needs to be hidden rather than a difference that needs to be celebrated and accommodated. More damning was what he revealed about Brittany's behavior during Emma's brief time in the hospital. She refused every single resource we offered: early intervention services, deaf family support groups, sign language instruction, even basic literature about raising deaf children. When I suggested connecting her with successful deaf adults who could share their experiences, she became hostile and accused me of pushing an agenda. Dr. Harrison had kept meticulous notes of every interaction, and he'd begun to suspect that Brittany's decision wasn't based on legitimate concerns about providing proper care, but rather on deep-seated prejudice and shame about having a defective child. She used that word repeatedly, Mrs. Thompson. Defective. She also mentioned multiple times that she and Michael were young and attractive and deserved to have a perfect family without complications. The most shocking revelation came when he showed me copies of medical documents that Brittany had tried to falsify. She'd attempted to have Emma's hearing loss described as profound and untreatable rather than the moderate conductive hearing loss that could potentially be improved with hearing aids. When that failed, she'd tried to pressure doctors into documenting additional disabilities that didn't exist, apparently hoping to make Emma less adoptable and more likely to remain in foster care permanently. She never intended for another family to adopt Emma, Dr. Harrison explained. She wanted her to disappear into the system permanently so she and Michael could pretend she never existed. That's why she was so threatened by your involvement. You represented the possibility that Emma might actually end up with a loving family. Armed with Dr. Harrison's documentation and Elena's connections in the legal advocacy community, Jennifer filed an emergency motion to have Emma's case reviewed. We presented evidence of medical neglect, falsified documents, and discriminatory treatment based on disability. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had a real chance of exposing the truth. But Brittany's retaliation was swift and brutal. Within days of our filing, I found myself facing criminal charges for elder abuse and harassment filed by Michael, along with a civil lawsuit claiming I had deliberately interfered with a legal adoption process and caused severe emotional distress to the birth parents. The legal documents claimed I was suffering from delusional disorder and posed a clear and present danger to Emma's welfare. The timing wasn't coincidental. These charges were designed to destroy my credibility just as we were gaining ground in the custody case. If I was facing criminal prosecution, no judge would even consider granting me visitation rights, let alone custody. Brittany had managed to turn my love for Emma into legal ammunition against me. The stress was overwhelming. My savings account was nearly empty from legal fees, my reputation in the community was destroyed, and now I was facing the possibility of actual jail time. Some nights I lay awake wondering if everyone was right, if I was indeed losing my mind to pursue a fight that seemed impossible to win. But then I'd remember Dr. Harrison's words about Emma's developmental delays, and I'd know that giving up would mean abandoning a child who needed someone to fight for her. The preliminary hearing for the criminal charges was scheduled for the same week as our custody review. Brittany and Michael would be presenting their case for why I should be permanently banned from Emma's life while simultaneously arguing that I belonged in prison for the crime of loving my granddaughter too much. The system they'd manipulated so effectively was closing in around me, but I refused to surrender without exhausting every possible option. Elena and the deaf community rallied around me during this darkest period, providing not just emotional support but practical help. They connected me with a disability rights attorney who worked pro bono, helped pay for some of my legal fees, and most importantly, continued gathering evidence about Emma's deteriorating condition in foster care. Their solidarity reminded me that this fight was bigger than just one family. It was about challenging a system that routinely failed deaf children and the families who loved them. The truth about Brittany's ultimate plan came to light through the most unexpected source, Michael's own mother-in-law, Patricia Walsh. She called me on a Sunday evening in March, her voice shaking with emotion. "Grace, I need to tell you something that's been eating me alive. Brittany confided in me about her real plans, and I can't stay silent anymore. what Patricia revealed made my blood run cold. Brittany had never intended to move on and forget about Emma. Instead, she'd been methodically planning to have another baby while ensuring that Emma remained hidden away permanently. She said she wanted to start fresh with a clean slate, Patricia explained. But more than that, she was terrified that Emma's existence would somehow taint any future children they had. The conspiracy was more elaborate than I'd imagined. Brittany had convinced Michael's entire extended family that I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, painting herself as a victim who needed protection from my obsessive harassment. She'd organized regular family meetings where they discussed strategies for keeping me away from Emma and ways to document my erratic behavior for future legal proceedings. Michael's aunts, uncles, and cousins had all been recruited into this campaign against me. They'd been instructed to avoid all contact with me and to report any attempts I made to reach out to them. If I tried to explain my side of the story to anyone in the family, Brittany had prepared them with responses about my delusions and inability to accept reality. Even more disturbing was learning that Brittany had been actively working to isolate Michael from anyone who might question their decision about Emma. She'd convinced him to cut ties with several longtime friends who'd expressed concern about abandoning the baby, claiming they were negative influences who didn't understand the challenges of raising a disabled child. She'd systematically eliminated every voice of reason from their social circle. The manipulation extended to their finances as well. Patricia revealed that Brittany had been secretly saving money for fertility treatments, planning to get pregnant again as soon as possible to replace Emma with a healthy baby. She'd calculated that having a perfect child would help Michael forget about his daughter and solidify their story that giving up Emma had been the right choice for everyone involved. Most sickening of all was Brittany's backup plan in case Emma was eventually adopted by a loving family. She'd researched ways to legally prevent any future contact, including changing their names and moving to another state if necessary. She said she couldn't risk Emma ever finding Michael when she got older, Patricia explained through tears. She wanted to erase every trace of that child from their lives. The family conspiracy reached its peak when they organized what they called an intervention for me. Led by Brittany and supported by Michael's siblings, they planned to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. The paperwork had already been prepared, and they'd scheduled meetings with doctors who would testify to my deteriorating mental state based entirely on second-hand reports of my behavior. My former friend Carol had been recruited to provide testimony about my concerning behavior in the neighborhood. According to the statements she'd signed, I'd been talking to myself obsessively, making inappropriate comments about other people's children, and displaying aggressive behavior when questioned about my activities. Every mundane interaction had been twisted into evidence of mental illness. The vandalism of my home wasn't random teenage mischief as I'd assumed. It was orchestrated by Brittany's younger brother as a way to make me feel unsafe and potentially provoke a reaction they could use as evidence of my instability. The message, "Leave Emma alone," had been carefully planned to make me appear paranoid if I claimed it was related to the custody case. When I shared this information with Jennifer, her expression grew grim. "They're building a comprehensive character assassination case," she said. "If they can convince a judge that you're mentally unstable, it won't matter what evidence we present about Emma's welfare. You'll be dismissed as a delusional woman whose testimony can't be trusted." The most heartbreaking part was realizing how thoroughly they'd destroyed my relationship with Michael. Brittany had convinced him that my love for Emma was actually a symptom of mental illness, that my determination to fight for her was proof that I'd lost touch with reality. She'd reframed every natural grandmotherly instinct as evidence of psychological dysfunction. Elena and her network helped me understand that this kind of systematic isolation and gaslighting was a common tactic used against family members who challenged decisions about disabled children. "They make you question your own sanity," she explained. "When everyone around you is saying the same thing, it becomes almost impossible to trust your own instincts." The pressure was becoming unbearable. I'd started questioning every memory, every conversation, wondering if I really was as unreasonable and obsessive as everyone claimed. Some days I found myself wondering if everyone would be better off if I just disappeared and let them move on with their lives. The only thing that kept me fighting was the image of Emma in that hospital nursery, alone and unloved, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, she was still waiting for someone to choose her. The second violation of the restraining order was completely fabricated, but the evidence was damning enough to terrify me. Brittany had somehow obtained security footage that appeared to show me following her through a grocery store, along with a receipt timestamp that proved I'd been there at the same time. What the footage didn't show was that I'd been shopping for my weekly groceries at the same store I'd used for 20 years, completely unaware that she was even there. Jennifer's face was grave as she reviewed the new charges. "Grace, this is serious. The prosecution is arguing that you deliberately tracked Brittany's movements and followed her with intent to intimidate. Combined with the elder abuse charges Michael filed, you're looking at possible jail time." The reality hit me like a physical blow. I could be separated from Emma forever, not just by family manipulation but by actual prison bars. The threat of incarceration coincided with devastating news about Emma's placement. She'd been moved to her third foster family in 8 months, this time because the Morrison family had reported that they couldn't handle her behavioral issues. The 8-month-old baby who should have been babbling and laughing was instead withdrawn, unresponsive, and showing signs of what one social worker had documented as failure to thrive syndrome. But even worse was what Jennifer discovered about Brittany's latest legal maneuver. She'd hired a different attorney to file papers requesting that I be declared mentally incompetent, which would automatically disqualify me from any custody considerations and potentially allow them to have me committed indefinitely. The petition included statements from Michael describing his mother's progressive deterioration and dangerous obsessions. The competency hearing was scheduled for the following month, and Brittany had assembled an impressive list of witnesses prepared to testify about my supposed mental decline. Michael's testimony would be the centerpiece, describing how his once loving mother had transformed into a paranoid and threatening stranger who refused to accept professional medical advice and had become fixated on a child she'd never even held. I reached my absolute breaking point sitting in Jennifer's office, staring at legal documents that painted me as mentally ill, dangerous, and delusional. Everything I'd fought for over the past 8 months was crumbling around me, and the system I'd trusted to protect children was being used as a weapon against the very person trying to save one. I found myself seriously considering giving up, wondering if everyone really would be better off without my interference. That's when Jessica Martinez walked into my life like an angel of mercy. She was Emma's new foster mother, and she'd requested a meeting with me despite the legal restrictions. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice filled with urgency, "I know I'm not supposed to contact you, but I can't stay silent about what I'm seeing. Emma is not okay, and I think you need to know what's really happening to her." Jessica had been a foster parent for 12 years, specializing in children with special needs, and she'd never encountered a case like Emma's. "This baby has been traumatized by neglect and isolation," she explained. "She doesn't respond to her name, doesn't make eye contact, and shows classic signs of attachment disorder. But the remarkable thing is that when I use basic sign language with her, she becomes alert and engaged in a way that's absolutely extraordinary." The videos Jessica showed me brought tears to my eyes and renewed hope to my heart. Emma, now 9 months old, was attempting to communicate through gestures and movements that were clearly intentional and meaningful. When Jessica signed simple words like eat or more, Emma's entire demeanor changed from listless withdrawal to active participation. She was a bright, intelligent child who'd been starved of proper communication for most of her life. "She's not damaged goods like everyone claims," Jessica said firmly. "She's a brilliant little girl who's been failed by every adult in her life except you. I've read your court filings, and everything you've argued about her needs and potential is absolutely correct. This child deserves a fighting chance, and if you stop now, she'll never get one." Jessica's professional assessment carried weight that my emotional pleas never could. As a licensed foster parent with an unblemished record, her testimony about Emma's condition and potential could potentially turn the tide in our legal battle. She'd documented Emma's responses to sign language, her developmental progress when given proper communication tools, and most importantly, the clear evidence that she was capable of thriving with the right support. More than that, Jessica had connections within the social services system who'd been quietly questioning Emma's case from the beginning. She introduced me to social workers who'd been troubled by the birth parents' immediate abandonment of their child and suspicious of the pattern of failed foster placements. These professionals had been building their own case file about Emma's situation, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The system failed this baby from day one, Jessica explained. But it's not too late to fix it. Emma needs permanency with someone who understands her needs and celebrates her differences. From everything I've observed, you're the only person in her life who's ever seen her as a whole person rather than a disability. For the first time in months, I felt genuine hope returning to my chest. Emma was still fighting, still trying to communicate and connect despite everything she'd endured. If she could be that strong and resilient, then I could find the strength to continue fighting for her. Jessica's validation reminded me that my instincts had been right all along. This wasn't about my inability to accept reality, it was about everyone else's refusal to see Emma's true potential. The competency hearing was still looming, and Brittany's conspiracy against me was still in full force, but now I had allies within the system who could testify to Emma's real needs and my legitimate concerns. The battle wasn't over yet, and this little girl who'd already survived so much was worth every moment of the fight ahead. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, an insurance investigator named David Chen who'd been reviewing claims related to Emma's medical care. He contacted Jennifer with information that would blow Brittany's case wide open. She'd filed multiple insurance claims for specialized medical equipment and therapy for Emma, collecting thousands of dollars for services that were never provided and equipment that was never purchased. David's investigation revealed that Brittany had been systematically defrauding the insurance company by claiming Emma required expensive interventions for multiple disabilities that didn't exist. She'd forged medical documents stating Emma had cerebral palsy, severe cognitive delays, and complex medical needs requiring round-the-clock care. The money she'd collected had gone directly into personal accounts, not toward Emma's care. But the insurance fraud was just the beginning. David's deeper investigation uncovered financial records showing that Brittany had researched the monetary value of giving up a severely disabled child. She'd discovered that certain disability benefits and insurance payouts were only available if the parents could prove they were financially unable to care for their child's special needs. Abandoning Emma wasn't just about shame, it was about money. Even more damning were email records recovered from Brittany's laptop showing her correspondence with adoption agencies. She'd shopped around for agencies willing to accept a deaf infant, specifically seeking organizations that would guarantee no future contact with birth families. Her emails revealed calculated cruelty, describing Emma as damaged goods and expressing concern that her existence would complicate our family image. Jennifer's legal team also uncovered security footage that completely contradicted the stalking charges against me. The grocery store surveillance clearly showed that I'd arrived at the store first and had been shopping normally when Brittany appeared. Rather than following her, the footage showed me actively avoiding her by changing aisles when I noticed her presence. Brittany had deliberately positioned herself to create the appearance of being followed. The most shocking discovery came when Elena's network located Emma's original hospital records, which had somehow been lost during the transfer process. These documents contained detailed notes from multiple medical professionals expressing serious concerns about the birth parents' attitudes and decision-making. Several nurses had documented Brittany's disturbing comments about Emma being better off dead than deaf and her refusal to even touch her newborn daughter. Dr. Harrison's original assessment had been even more comprehensive than he'd revealed to me. His notes included detailed observations about Brittany's inappropriate effect and concerning statements about disabled individuals. He'd recommended family counseling and disability awareness education, but Brittany had refused all services and threatened to file complaints against any medical professional who questioned her parenting decisions. Michael's awakening came gradually, then all at once. He'd grown increasingly uncomfortable with Brittany's obsession with hiding all traces of Emma's existence, but the final straw was discovering the insurance fraud. When confronted with the evidence of her financial schemes, Brittany's mask finally slipped completely. She screamed that he was too weak and pathetic to make the hard decisions necessary for their future success. The security footage that proved my innocence had actually captured something far more incriminating, a recording of Brittany meeting with a private investigator she'd hired to follow me and document my stalking behavior. The PI had refused to falsify evidence, so she'd created the stalking narrative herself by deliberately placing herself in my path and then claiming I was following her. Elena and her legal advocacy team had been quietly building their own case file with the help of disability rights organizations. They'd documented a pattern of discrimination and medical neglect that extended far beyond just Emma's situation. Their investigation revealed that the adoption agency Brittany had chosen specialized in removing children with disabilities from families unwilling to care for them, often without proper evaluation of the children's actual needs or potential. Jennifer presented all this evidence in an emergency hearing that felt like the trial of the century. For 3 hours, witness after witness testified to Brittany's deception, financial fraud, and systematic abuse of both the legal system and her own daughter. Dr. Harrison's testimony about Emma's original condition versus her current developmental delays was particularly powerful, demonstrating the direct harm caused by months of neglect and inappropriate placement. The courtroom was packed with members of the deaf community, disability advocates, and even some of the medical professionals who'd originally treated Emma. Their presence sent a clear message that this case represented something much larger than one family's dispute. It was about fundamental questions of disability discrimination and children's rights to loving families. Brittany's attorney tried desperately to maintain their original narrative about me being mentally unstable, but the evidence was overwhelming. When faced with proof of insurance fraud, falsified medical records, and documented lies about the stalking incident, their case collapsed entirely. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as each piece of evidence was presented, and I could see the exact moment when he realized the extent of the deception he'd been presented with in previous hearings. Michael took the stand as a hostile witness, his face pale and his hands shaking as he recanted his previous testimony. "I was wrong about my mother," he said quietly. "Everything I said before was based on what my wife told me, and I realize now that I never questioned any of it. My mother was fighting for my daughter when I was too blind to see what was really happening." The final blow came when the private investigator Brittany had hired testified about her attempts to bribe him into creating false evidence against me. His recorded conversations with her revealed the calculated nature of her conspiracy, including her explicit statement that she would destroy anyone who threatened her perfect life plan and her intention to disappear permanently if Emma ever tried to contact them in the future. The explosive court hearing felt like a reckoning 15 months in the making. Judge Morrison, who'd previously ruled against me based on fabricated evidence, looked genuinely shaken as he reviewed the mountain of evidence proving Brittany's systematic deception. The courtroom was standing room only, filled with deaf community advocates, medical professionals, and journalists who'd gotten wind of the story. Jennifer's opening statement was devastating in its clarity. "Your Honor, this case represents one of the most egregious examples of disability discrimination and parental abuse this court has ever seen. Emma Thompson was abandoned not because her parents couldn't care for her, but because they viewed her as defective merchandise that would damage their social image and financial future." When Brittany took the stand, her composure finally cracked under the weight of evidence against her. Faced with documentation of her insurance fraud, falsified medical records, and recorded conversations about disposing of damaged goods, she abandoned any pretense of being a loving mother making a difficult decision. Her true feelings poured out in a torrent of rage and disgust. "You want the truth?" she screamed at Jennifer during cross-examination. "Fine. I refuse to sacrifice my entire life for a defective child who will never be normal. Why should I ruin my future and my marriage for something that's broken? I'm young and beautiful and I deserve better than dealing with a deaf kid who'll never amount to anything." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Brittany continued her rant. "Everyone keeps talking about what's best for Emma, but what about what's best for me? What about my dreams and plans? Why should I have to learn some stupid hand language and deal with special schools and all that garbage when I can just start over with a healthy baby?" Judge Morrison's face grew darker with each word. Mrs. Thompson, he said sternly, are you stating under oath that you abandoned your daughter solely because of her disability? Brittany's attorney frantically tried to signal her to stop talking, but she was beyond caring about legal consequences. Yes. Exactly. Because I'm not going to pretend that being deaf is some kind of gift or special blessing like these disability fanatics claim. It's a defect, and I refuse to live with defective products in my life. I work hard to maintain my standards, and a deaf kid doesn't meet those standards. The gasps and murmurs from the courtroom observers forced Judge Morrison to call for order. Even Michael looked horrified by his wife's words, finally seeing the true person he'd married. Brittany seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but the damage was irreparable. Her mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the shallow, cruel person underneath. Jessica Martinez's testimony about Emma's current condition provided a stark contrast to Brittany's callousness. She described a bright, engaging child who responded enthusiastically to sign language and showed remarkable intelligence when given proper communication tools. Emma is thriving now that she's receiving appropriate support, Jessica explained. She's curious, affectionate, and developing normally in every way except for her hearing. With continued proper care, there's no limit to what she can achieve. Elena Rodriguez spoke passionately about the deaf community's willingness to support Emma and any family committed to her welfare. Deafness is not a disability to overcome but a difference to celebrate, she testified. Emma could grow up bilingual in English and American Sign Language, giving her advantages that hearing children don't have. She could become a teacher, doctor, lawyer, anything she dreams of being. The medical testimony was equally powerful. Dr. Harrison presented evidence showing that Emma's developmental delays were entirely due to neglect and inappropriate placement, not her hearing loss. This child was failed by the very people meant to protect her, he said. Her biological parents, the adoption agency, and the initial foster placements all ignored evidence-based best practices for raising deaf children. When I finally took the stand, I felt the weight of 15 months of fighting for Emma's future. I spoke about the sign language classes I'd taken, the deaf community I'd joined, and the extensive preparations I'd made to welcome Emma into my home. Judge Morrison listened intently as I described my vision for Emma's future, a life filled with love, opportunity, and celebration of her unique identity. Your Honor, I concluded, Emma deserves to grow up knowing she was wanted, loved, and valued exactly as she is. She deserves to learn about deaf culture and history, to see deaf role models succeeding in every field imaginable. Most importantly, she deserves to know that her family fought for her when everyone else gave up. Brittany's final desperate move was attempting to flee the courtroom when she realized the judge was about to rule against her. Court security stopped her at the door, and the papers that fell from her purse revealed airline tickets to Mexico and documents showing she'd been planning to disappear internationally rather than face the consequences of her actions. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Emma's abandonment was declared invalid due to fraud and discrimination. Brittany was immediately arrested on charges of insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and child abandonment. The restraining orders against me were dissolved, and I was granted immediate temporary custody pending a full family evaluation. But the most important moment came when I was finally allowed to hold Emma. At 15 months old, she was small for her age but absolutely beautiful, with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. When I signed grandmother and pointed to myself, her face lit up with the most radiant smile I'd ever seen. She reached up and touched my face gently, and I knew in that instant that every moment of the fight had been worth it. 6 months have passed since that life-changing day in court, and our little house has been transformed into a place of joy and discovery. Emma's bedroom is painted in bright, cheerful colors with visual stimulation aids that help her developing vision compensation skills. The walls are covered with pictures showing sign language vocabulary, and her toy collection includes specially designed items that vibrate and light up to provide the sensory feedback she enjoys. Emma's progress has been nothing short of miraculous. With proper communication support and early intervention services, she's not only caught up to typical developmental milestones but exceeded many of them. Her vocabulary in American Sign Language grows daily, and she's recently started combining signs to create her own simple sentences. Her pediatrician says she's developing exactly as expected for a bright, healthy 15-month-old child. The transformation in our family dynamics has been equally remarkable. Michael filed for divorce from Brittany within weeks of the court hearing, finally seeing her true character clearly. He's been attending sign language classes with me twice a week and spending every Saturday afternoon learning to communicate with his daughter. Watching him sign "I love you" to Emma for the first time brought tears to both our eyes. The legal aftermath took several more months to resolve completely. Brittany was sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud and child abandonment, though she'll likely serve less time with good behavior. The adoption agency that facilitated Emma's placement lost its license and faced federal investigation for discriminatory practices. Several other families came forward with similar stories of children with disabilities being inappropriately removed from loving homes. Elena and the deaf community have become extended family to both Emma and me. We attend deaf cultural events regularly, where Emma interacts with deaf children and adults who serve as positive role models for her future. She's already showing preference for visual communication and seems naturally drawn to the expressive, animated conversations that characterize deaf social interactions. My own journey has been one of unexpected personal growth. Learning sign language opened doors to a community I never knew existed, filled with accomplished professionals, artists, teachers, and parents who happen to be deaf. I've discovered that Emma isn't lacking anything. She's gaining access to a rich, vibrant culture with its own literature, art, humor, and traditions. The financial strain of the legal battle was significant, but support from the deaf community and disability advocates helped ease that burden. More importantly, I've returned to substitute teaching with a new specialty in deaf education. Working with deaf students has shown me that Emma's future is limitless, filled with possibilities I never imagined when I first saw her in that hospital nursery. Emma's first signed "I love you" came on a quiet Tuesday evening while we were reading a bedtime story together. She looked directly into my eyes, carefully formed the signs she'd been practicing, and then launched herself into my arms for a hug that conveyed more emotion than words ever could. In that moment, I knew that all the pain, fighting, and uncertainty had led us exactly where we needed to be. Michael's relationship with his daughter continues to strengthen as his sign language skills improve. He's moved back to town and bought a house just 15 minutes away, allowing Emma to spend time with both her father and grandmother regularly. He's also become an advocate for deaf children's rights, speaking at conferences about the importance of family support and proper early intervention. The most powerful validation came from an unexpected source, Emma herself. During a recent visit to Dr. Harrison's office, she was interacting confidently with the medical staff, charming everyone with her bright personality and impressive communication skills. As we were leaving, Dr. Harrison pulled me aside and said, "Grace, you saved that child's life. Not just her physical well-being, but her soul, her potential, her future. She's going to be extraordinary because you refused to let her be ordinary." Today, Emma is thriving in every sense of the word. She's curious about everything, fearless in her exploration of the world, and surrounded by people who love and celebrate exactly who she is. She attends a special preschool program designed for deaf children, where she's already showing leadership qualities and natural compassion for her classmates. Looking back, I realize this journey taught me that love truly can conquer prejudice, and that fighting for what's right is always worth the cost. Emma didn't need to be fixed or overcome her deafness, she needed to be loved, supported, and given the tools to succeed as the remarkable person she was always meant to be. Our story has inspired other families facing similar challenges, and I regularly speak with grandparents who are fighting for grandchildren with disabilities. The message I share is simple. Never give up on a child who needs you, because sometimes you're the only thing standing between them and a system that doesn't recognize their worth. As I watch Emma playing in our backyard, confidently communicating with her deaf playmates from preschool, I'm filled with gratitude for the journey that brought us together. She waves at me through the window, signing grandmother with the biggest smile, and I'm reminded once again that some battles are worth fighting no matter how impossible they seem. What started as a grandmother's desperate fight to save an abandoned baby became a story of triumph over discrimination and proof that every child deserves a champion. Emma will grow up knowing that her family fought for her, celebrated her differences, and never saw her as anything less than perfect exactly as she is. Have you ever had to fight against your own family to protect someone you loved? How far would you go to save a child from discrimination and abandonment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories of standing up for what's right even when it seemed impossible. Please like this video if it touched your heart, subscribe for more real family stories, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that love really can overcome any obstacle. Remember, sometimes being the only person willing to fight makes all the difference in a child's life. Thank you for listening to our journey, and may you always have the courage to choose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over despair.